The hospital room was cold, colder than it should have been. James lay stiffly in the narrow bed, the sterile white sheets tucked too tightly around him. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound keeping him company, a monotonous metronome in the dead of night. He didn't remember much about the accident, just flashes, headlights blinding him, the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal against metal. Then darkness. When he woke up, he was here. The doctor said he was lucky. A concussion, a few broken ribs, some stitches. A miracle, considering the state of his car. But James didn't feel lucky. There was something wrong with this place, something he couldn't quite name. It started the first night. He woke up paralyzed. His mind was alert, aware, but his body refused to respond. His limbs were heavy, leaden, and his throat felt like it was being held shut by invisible hands. At first, he thought it was the painkillers, a bad reaction to the medication. But then, he saw it. In the corner of the room, just past the foot of his bed, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly grazing the ceiling. The shape was wrong. Its limbs, too long. Its torso, too thin. James couldn't see its face. It was shrouded in shadow, a blackness that seemed to absorb the faint light from the hallway. But he could feel its eyes, cold, piercing, and fixed directly on him. He tried to scream, but his lips wouldn't move. His chest heaved, his heart pounded against his ribs, but he remained frozen. The figure didn't move. It simply watched, silent and unmoving, like a statue carved from midnight. The minutes stretched into eternity, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure was gone. When the morning nurse came in, James tried to explain what happened, but she only gave him a patronizing smile. "It's the meds," she said softly. "Night terrors. Happens to a lot of patients." James didn't argue. He didn't have the energy. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the figure was closer. It stood right by his bedside, its head tilting at an unnatural angle, like a broken marionette. James could see its hand now. Long, bony fingers ending in sharp, claw-like nails. It didn't touch him, but he could feel the air grow colder around his skin. And then it spoke. A whisper, raspy and low like wind through dead leaves. "James." The voice slithered into his ear, sending an electric jolt of fear through his paralyzed body. His name, spoken by something that wasn't human. The following morning, James demanded to be discharged. He didn't care about the broken ribs or the concussion. He needed to get out. But the doctor refused. "You're still not stable," he said. "We can't release you yet." James's heart sank. Another night. Another night with it. That evening, as the hospital fell into its usual quiet stillness, James braced himself. He fought to stay awake, blinking furiously to keep his eyes open. But exhaustion won. He slipped into a restless sleep. When he woke again, the figure was already there. It was crouched over him, its face inches from his. James could see its mouth now, a wide, gaping maw lined with rows of jagged teeth. No eyes. Just a smooth expanse of dark, featureless skin. And then, something worse happened. It touched him. The creature's hand, ice-cold and leathery, pressed against his chest. James felt a searing pain, like his ribs were being crushed all over again. His vision blurred, his pulse roared in his ears. And then, he was falling. Not physically, but mentally. It felt like his mind was being dragged down into a black void, deeper and deeper, as though the creature was pulling his very soul out of his body. And through it all, the voice whispered his name over and over. "James. James. James." The next morning, the nurse found him unresponsive, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. He was alive, but barely. When they finally managed to stabilize him, James whispered a single plea to the doctor. "Please, don't let me sleep."